Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to those of you who are already here for being so timely this afternoon. We still have lots of people waiting to get on, and it is still 4 minutes to 2 p.m. So I'm going to turn my camera off. Please feel free to remain off camera if you'd like. But if you can, just go ahead and change your name if it's not already the name of who you are and the parish with whom you are representing, or type that in the chat box while we're waiting for the rest of our colleagues to join. That would be great. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And we'll get started promptly at 2 o'clock.
Hey, Ms. Devin.
All righty, everyone. It is exactly 2 p.m. So I'm going to get started because we have a lot to cover this afternoon. For those of you who just joined, I will ask that you, if you can, change your name by clicking the participants box, your name or where your username is, click more and rename. I'll do that for mine right now. So that I can keep track of everybody who's here, and also make sure that if you ask a question, I'm addressing actually you and not Galaxy Phone X2 or whatever it may be. And also feel free to remain off camera. This is a long presentation. I know some of you might have to be taking notes, walk out of the room might be on a phone rather than a computer. So please feel comfortable with that. And if at any point you do have a question that I haven't specifically paused for questions to come off mute, please just put them in the chat box instead of coming off of mute mid presentation, because more than likely it's going to be answered at some point. But I will take frequent pauses for questions. So that being said, we are going to dive right in. As you can see, we have a pretty long agenda today. And I do want to preface by saying we're going to follow up from some questions that y'all had during the original kickoff webinar. And we're going to talk all about eligibility for centers, for teachers, and everything on the administrative end and everything on the education end, and then the family eligibility. I also want to preface this by saying many of you have already participated in the Birth to 3 Seats pilot before. And some of this information will either be new or different from what you've heard in the past, and that is okay. There are changes to some of the eligibility requirements because of the ever-changing nature of a pilot, ever-changing nature of what at the department's regulations are, what we're seeing works and doesn't work for families, for you, et cetera. So please, if you are a returning member and you see something that you think, oh my gosh, that's different from what I told my providers this year, don't panic, because this is just for 22, 23, and anything that is different or changed, you will not be held accountable for from the previous year. This is a fresh start, and so please put any panic in the corner. But of course, if you have questions, please ask me. So we're going to go through a whole bunch of different components of eligibility. We're going to talk about enrollment. If we have time, we'll go through some practice scenarios and then discuss next steps. So there were some really great questions from the kickoff webinar. The first was, are foster children really categorically eligible, and what is needed to verify? Foster children are categorically eligible. The only required verification is their placement agreement with DCFS. So they are the only exception to income, work, etc., any other eligibility documents. As long as you have that agreement, the foster children are set to go. You are encouraged to collect other verifications such as immunization records, birth certificates, etc. But we know as foster children are in the circumstances that they're in, those might not be available. It's a good practice to collect them if they can get them, but not mandatory. The second question, are families experiencing homelessness categorically eligible? They are not categorically eligible. They may be verified as experiencing homelessness through your local McKinney-Vento liaison and should have an extended period of time to retrieve eligibility documents. And we recommend 90 days. So for example, if a family is experiencing homelessness, they come to you with absolutely nothing, you can say, we're going to enroll your child for 90 days. At the end of the 90th day, you need to present to us the documents that Devin's talking about in today's presentation. And if at the end of those 90 days, we either get documentation that proves you are not eligible based on income or work or actively seeking employment, or you're not able to turn in those eligibility documents, at the end of the 90 days, their enrollment should end. Following up on that question, you must still request income verification for families experiencing homelessness. If at any point they provide you documentation where you and your team deems that they are over income, over that 85% state median income, they are no longer eligible. Please note, as I mentioned in the previous webinar, that it is my guess, as a person who's experienced eligibility and enrollment for the last couple of years, that this is a very unlikely situation. If a family is truly experiencing homelessness, it is very unlikely that they are also meeting this income threshold. It is possible, of course, anything's possible. So if you do encounter a situation like that, before you make any eligibility determination, notifying the family that they're out, notifying their family that they're in, please reach out to me so we can go over the documents together to make sure that we're doing the right thing for the family. Moving on to the next questions. Eligibility documentation should be aligned with which dates? This was a great question. Families will submit applications with eligibility documentation, which are required to have recent dates. The date of that eligibility documentation, so their pay statements, their letters from employers, their immunization records, et cetera, anything should be within 60 days of the date of the family's application. It's not the enrollment date, it's not your review date, it's the application date. And if the department recommends that you at the RSN level, review applications within 10 days of its submission. So it should not get to a point where you're like, oh, it's 60 days from my review date, because if you're doing the best practice, you're not letting it get to that far of a date. Again, sometimes things happen, and if that is a circumstance that comes up, please reach out to me so we can work together to make sure that the family still is providing the correct documentation. Then the next question, what is the 12 months of care start date? 12 months of care begins when you have determined eligibility based on their application date. So it should be no more than 10 days from their application date. And then they should include in their application the date that they would like to enroll their child. So eligibility begins when you, the RSN, determines the family is eligible and notify the family of that eligibility. Ideally, notification and enrollment dates are going to be as close as possible. But if a family defers their enrollment after their application, so say I, Devin Camerata, apply for my child today, but I don't want to start him until September 15th, I'm cutting into my enrollment my eligibility by deferring that that start date. Let's see, and this is my last page of follow-up questions, and I'm going to check the chat box and see what questions from the field have come. Are birth to 3 seats and CCAP the same thing? No, they are not the same thing. They are two different publicly funded seats. They have very similar eligibility requirements with a few small exceptions. They are two very separate entities and should be treated as such when you're thinking about things like child count, when you're thinking about things like ARPA stabilization grant applications that the centers are applying for. They should not count birth to 3 children as CCAP children. They are two separate entities. Can children be enrolled in both CCAP and birth to 3 seats? So the question is a little bit yes and no. Yes, that they can apply for CCAP for part-time, holiday, before and after care, or summer care, or any care that may extend beyond what you're able to offer with your B-3 funding. Children can use B-3 seats for their full regular day and enroll in CCAP for after or before care as the family needs. CCAP, however, should not or should no longer, if you've previously layered in the past, split funding for a full day of care with birth to 3 seats, because the dollar amounts are so nearly equal that it can't fund, both would have to fund a full-time seat, and they can't fund the same full-time seat. So if this is an issue for you and your network specifically, please email me one off to problem solve here. It should not be, hopefully, but we will tackle that as needed. So I think this is my last slide. Yep. So I'm going to check the chat box and see if there are any questions about what has been asked in the chat box. Okay. So how will, Michelle asked, how will auditing work for those students if we don't receive the documents within the 90 days? So you would document and write a note, like a closure note, and I can give examples of that. That's a great idea. I'll write that down. Saying family did not provide, family was originally applying as experiencing homelessness. Family did not return documents within 90 days. Family was notified on X, Y, and Z date to return documentation. Enrollment was closed on X date. That goes into the documentation for that family if that child were to be pulled for an audit within the monitoring team here at the department, and then you would be covered. So I will closure note for cases. It's a great question, Michelle. Okay, Sarintha has a question. Homeless families must be working 20 hours per week. Yes, homeless families will still need to meet every single eligibility requirement. If they are employed, they must be working 20 hours or more per week. Pam, you can come off mute and ask your question.
It was kind of lengthy to put in the chat
That's
box.
okay.
So Devin, we're still determining children eligible right now for this year's. But when does all of this when do we convert, like right now, if I had a child who was referred through the Kenny Vento, they are categorically eligible. When do I cut off? Is it July 1st is when we start doing all the new things or the new requirements?
Yeah, so that's a good question. It's a little bit of a difficult question. Any child that you are going to fund with fiscal year 22-23 dollars should use this eligibility criteria. So that means if this child who just applied, if they are going to be funded using this funding source, which they will likely be if they are continuing into care for the upcoming year. So you're going to want to follow up with that family at a certain point, or put in the documentation saying that child was enrolled on, March 5th. Anything really after today, you should use these eligibility criteria. If it was yesterday, if it was the day before you started that process, you didn't know because this is new information. Anything that's dated after today really should be using this eligibility criteria. So any application that you receive after April 6th should be using this eligibility criteria.
Okay, because we are still determining children eligible, and they are like starting tomorrow or the next day. So, okay, so we will now, okay.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Devin, I was gonna ask a follow-up. I think you clarified it, but if I could just make sure I understood what you said, because at first I thought I heard you say any child funded in 22-23 has to have this criteria, but then you qualified that any child who has an application today or later, because children who qualified in January are eligible through January. So they don't have a new application, but they are funded with 22.
Correct. Yeah, that's why I corrected myself there. Any application that comes after today's date should be based on this webinar's criteria. Thank you for that clarification.
Okay, no, you clarified yourself, but
Well, I appreciate the circular clarity here. We're all clear.
double checking. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Okay. So Dinez in the chat box says, does this still apply if seats are not available at the time of the application and they are on a waiting list? All eligibility criteria will apply regardless of if a child is on a waiting list or not. So what I would suggest, if you are in a situation where you have a waiting list for your birth to 3 seats, please immediately reach out to me. I believe I mentioned this a little bit at the previous webinar, but if you are able to establish a wait list, there will be as much effort on the department's end as possible to get you at least a little bit more funding to open up that wait list. However, yes, the application, any application, any wait list, any child who is applying for birth to 3 seats, these are the requirements. Emmy asked, if a family is placed on a wait list after considered eligible, should we have families complete a new application and submit new recent documents, or are new documents alone sufficient? If you have deemed a family eligible and they're on a wait list, they will not need to get additional documents for the enrollment date. If you've deemed them eligible at the time of their original application, that's all they need for the 12 months of care, or for the 12 months of, for the 12 months of care. Their wait list time would eat into that 12 months of eligibility. However, we can't, that's kind of one of the tricky parts of the of having a wait list, of not having an infinite number of seats. But hopefully we are able to get everybody in and there won't be too much of a wait list. And if there is a wait list, at least you can transfer them to potentially being enrolled in CCAP, because our eligibility criteria is so similar. Krista said, can I repeat what I said about when their year starts and ends? Is it the eligibility date or start date? It is the date that their application has been reviewed by the Ready Start Network, where you deemed them eligible and communicated it to the family. So for example, maybe you're doing eligibility reviews on a Friday afternoon. You say Devin's family is eligible. You're not able to get the calls out or the letters out until Monday. Monday will be the date of their the start and end date of their 12 months of care, when you decide and communicate it to the family. Please make that be as close to the same day as possible for your own sanity. But yeah, I understand that they may not be exactly the same date. Sarantha, I'm not sure about the early Head Start question. I can follow up with you about that. I would assume not, since those rates are so similar now. But again, I'm not the early Head Start expert, so I will have to follow up on that with you, but I shall. And then I mean, if they are working, they must be employed 20 hours a week. Yep. That if they could also be actively seeking employment, they will have 12 months of eligibility if it's their first time being an actively seeking employment person. I'm going to get to that a little bit later, but if they are employed, if they're a person experiencing homelessness and are employed, they must be working 20 hours or more per week to be eligible for birth to 3 seats. So Janae said, homeless families have to submit a McKinney-Vento form and check stubs income documentation. Does McKinney-Vento form just replace proof of residency? Essentially, yes. Very good, Janae. And it also provides them that extended period to be able to get the time they need in order to collect documents. Because as we know, families experiencing homelessness may have documents in different places. They may have lost documents because of a natural disaster, or they may just not have access to them because they're in a home with a person who was abusive and that person isn't comfortable going back to that home and needs to get another, a new copy of documents. That's why there's that extended period. So I think I've gone through all the questions. I did see that Emmy raised a hand. Emmy, you'll be the last question for this section and then we'll move on. Emmy, go ahead and pop off mute.
Sorry, I wanted to pose a scenario and I didn't want it to be too lengthy either.
No,
so in regards to the waitlist question, it also, my question really ties more to applicants who take a little longer to submit their documents. So let's say they applied in August, but we don't actually get all of the proof of income and proof of residence, even though we've been in contact with them till months later. Should we make them reapply so they have a different application date, or essentially could the application date remain in August, but we have most recent documents? So it may not necessarily be the waitlist question.
Yeah,
we have an online system, so we would have to delete the application for them to start a new one. And I just want to make that the protocol if that's recommended.
Right, that's a great question. My first instinct is to say, no, don't make them redo an application. What I would do, and in the similar situation to what Michelle from Calcasieu posed of, well, what if at the end of the 90 days, the family experiencing homelessness isn't able to provide us those documents? I will create a template for additional notes for the Ready Start Network to put into any applicant's file, essentially, and say, basically, you could say, I, Emmy, gave an extension to this family for X number of days to provide me this documentation. You'll see in the PowerPoint that it's recommended that we give that 30 days is the time frame to, you have the flexibility to say, look, you have everything except for X document. Can you get it within 15 days? Can you get it within 30 days? And then you have the ability to be flexible with the family in that way. If I would say, try to keep it within 30 days. If they're not able to provide a document within 30 days, use your best judgment to say whether or not you would grant them an additional extension. Please note that in that family's case files with the template that I'll provide to you all after this webinar in a couple of days when I'm created. But I would not make them do an entirely new application unless they truly did not provide you any documentation, and it's you're just holding a spot that somebody else could use and is going to follow the rules. So I'd say a judgment call, 30 days is best, but you're able to extend as needed.
Okay, I was just questioning more for auditing. We really haven't ever had an issue where we'd have an old app and a newer document, but I just wanted to make sure that wasn't going to be an auditing thing, that, documents that weren't within 60 days of the app date, but were most recent when we deem them eligible. So I'll definitely consider that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Okay. So we're going to keep on rolling, everybody. Thank you so much for starting off with lots of engagement and questions. I really appreciate it. So now we're going to talk about eligibility requirements for centers and teachers. So I think everybody has gotten clear on this before. This should be second time, third time, fourth time for everybody seeing this, that any center, participating should be a type 3 center. Volunteers of America, you're putting them in family child care centers. And if anybody else in Ready Start Networks, any other participating Ready Start Network would like to place children in a family child care center, please reach out to me and put the justification in your planning document. That is an option. They must have a 21-22 performance rating of proficient or above. If they are a new type 3 center, or if they're that family child care center that you would like to place them in, that does not yet have a performance rating, please provide rationale for the partnership in your partnership agreement, make additional efforts to support them, and contact me and run it by me to make sure that we have a plan put in place. They must have infant spots available or be able to serve infants beginning in fall 2022. You can use birth to 3 seat funds to create infant spots as able, and then ensure that the seats are full-time, which means 30 hours per week minimum, 6 hours of continuous care per day minimum. That comes from the definition in Bulletin 139, which, as I mentioned before, is cross-referenced here because we've layered so many of these eligibility requirements with CCAP. The ECAC requirements for teachers is that they must either already have their ECAC or be enrolled in the ECAC program by fall 2022. You at the Ready Start Network level are allowed to increase the rigor of any of these requirements. I mentioned this before, if you have a really large network and a lot of people want these seats, but you don't have enough to place elsewhere, you can create an application. You can say, no, not just proficient above, we're only going to place in excellence centers, or it's only going to go to returning centers for networks who participated in previous years. You're allowed to ratchet up that rigor. We just are not going to decrease it. So now family eligibility, the real meat and potatoes of today's webinar. So I just want to frame, and I think this is something that's been missing from a lot of the previous years of this pilot, is the why behind eligibility criteria for families. I think everybody on this call, everybody in the department, everybody in your offices, if we could wave a magic wand and say every child with a heartbeat has a free tuition seat, regardless of any other circumstance. Unfortunately, there just isn't enough funding in the world. There's not enough to be able to do that. So we have to draw a line in the sand somewhere. And the eligibility criteria that we're going to talk about today are all put in place so that we are helping families to either be positioned, remain in a position, or get the skills they need, or get the stability they need in order to be the best for their children. Financially, in every capacity. So adults in the household are either are seeking work or currently working 20 hours a week so that they are financially able to provide for their child, that they are involved in that is going to ensure safety, that's going to make sure that we're getting birth certificates to make sure that not some crazy kidnapper is just signing up some random kid for care. We're making sure that this child is actually connected to this adult. We're making sure, COVID has taught us all about why vaccinations and health is so important, to be keeping track of all of those things. They're not just regulations put in place by the department to make life challenging for you and families. They have, every single component has a reason. And that reason ties into, helping the families who are most in need get the care that they need. If anybody has any questions about eligibility requirements and why that requirement exists, please feel free to ask and give pushback in some areas. One of the new eligibility requirements is actually because Emmy and Christine and Lafayette pushed back on an eligibility requirement this past year, and we were able to take it to the team and say, hey, this doesn't make sense. Let's change it to this. So please keep that dialogue open with me. So some logistics about determining eligibility before we get into the nuances of it. You at the Ready Start Network level are, is your hand still up for the same question, or did you raise it again? I think it's still up. Okay. The general logistics, are that you are all in charge of determining eligibility at the Ready Start Network level. The department is not determining eligibility. It is on your offices to make sure that every family is meeting the eligibility criteria. It's 12 months of care from their application date. You could also, for ease sake, say it's the fiscal year 22-23, so July to June. Obviously, some families are applying at different times of the year because babies are born all year round, and that's what happens. But you have the ability to make these adjustments communication wise to families. And they should be given a reasonable opportunity, as I mentioned, to provide documentation. If there is something incomplete in their application, our recommendation is 30 days. But like I said, in Emmy's scenario, you have the leeway to extend that as needed. Again, our recommendation is to not do too much, because you might be putting yourself on a wild goose chase chasing down families. And lastly, all eligibility documents should be retained and protected for family privacy. The department will monitor all eligibility and attendance documents mid-fiscal year. So around December, January is when we reach out to you asking for a small percentage of your children and their documentation. So you'll provide that to the department. And that's why it's so important to be so strict about how you're collecting those documents. So some tips before we get further. Everything needs a paper trail. Document everything, every call, every email that happens between a family, print it out, put it with their file. Did you call and ask me a question? Write it down, log it, give a summary of what Devin said, put it in the documents, print out my emails. Give any documentation that you can create to connect with the family's application, put it in. If you're ever in doubt about something, contact me. Reference your guidance documents. Ask for more clear documents from a family. Remember, like I said at the previous webinar, they are getting free childcare. They can get you the information you need to make sure that they are qualified for it. Don't be afraid to ask for that. And don't be afraid to ask me for help. So now we're going to get into the criteria. Of course, we need to verify birth date and immunization records. That is pretty standard across any publicly funded seat, making sure that the children are the correct age. The income eligibility, 85% of the state median income. I'm going to show you a chart with the number of members of the family with the corresponding dollar amount per month. If a family consists of a minor unmarried parent, and shout out to Lafayette because this was something that they brought up and we were able to consider raising this income level for a family with a minor unmarried parent to 95% of the state median income. That table is included on slide 61, which we'll get to in a little bit. There also needs to be either the head of the adults in the household need to be working in school and training or actively seeking work for 20 hours per week minimum. And then families with children who have disabilities only need to meet 15 hours per week of work or training. And then families in a temporary living arrangement due to loss of housing or economic hardship, so that they can be enrolled immediately, however, still need to meet that the eligibility criteria. It's just the families or the children in foster care whose families do not need to. So when we're talking about family eligibility, we need to talk about the household. So the head of household is the person who submits the application. Typically that's mom, but it could be mom and dad. It can be grandma. It can be anybody, but they have to have legal custody of the children that they're applying on whose behalf they're applying. We'll get into that in a little bit. So the head of household, then their legal or non-legal spouse of the parent, any dependent children below the age of 18. These are all the members of the household. So there's a couple of caveats here. If a parent is a minor unmarried parent, the parent of the MUP or the minor unmarried parent is the head of household, because if they're not 18 yet, they can't legally sign documents that are like this program. They have to have somebody do it on their behalf unless they're legally emancipated. A minor unmarried parent aged 16 to 17 years old must also meet the school or training requirements. Hopefully they're able to provide you a high school transcript and give you that, or some kind of GED program. If they are 18 years of age or older as a minor unmarried parent, they're head of household. They're legally an adult and can sign documents on their behalf. A household composition does not include aunts, uncles, adult children, even adult children who may have disabilities. If they are over the age of 18, they're not in the household. An aunt and an uncle and their sister can all live in the same house technically, but only the parent and the dependent children of that parent are part of the household. Oops. Okay. So adults with a disability, verification of a disability allows adults in the household to be exempt from work or actively seeking employment requirements for the B-3 seats pilot. This is different from previous years. So if anybody's on the call panicking, don't fret, this is new. So verification of disability includes Social Security Administration, SSI, Veterans Affairs at 70% or higher. Veterans Affairs just has a higher threshold for what they will or will not claim, or a doctor's statement of disability with the date of the letter. If, you know, it could be something that was really recent and they haven't been able to go through the whole government situation yet. All disability verification must include the name of the person, dates, the dollar value of those benefits if they're receiving a dollar amount, et cetera. And if one parent is disabled and the other is not, the not disabled parent still needs to be meeting the other eligibility requirements. They need to either be working, actively seeking employment. One parent being disabled does not negate the other parent's eligibility requirements. Both parents need to be meeting eligibility requirements. If they're disabled, then they are eligible by having a disability. I see some questions popping up in the chat box. I'm going to address them in just a few minutes when we pause for a quick scenario. So household composition, some common errors that we have seen over the last couple of years are that if a grandparent applies for their grandchild, they must still meet the work requirements of the pilot, even if retired. That grandparent or that grandparent of that grandchild also needs to have legal custody and be able to prove that with documentation. If they're retired, they still need to be working unless they have a disability. Ensure that the family has the same number of household members on all eligibility documents. Ooh, that was a hard time, had a hard time saying eligibility there. Family needs to have the same number of household members on every piece of documentation, from the application they submit with you to your calculations, et cetera. Just be consistent. I've said this already. If there are two parents in the household, both must meet the requirements. And then adults with disability do not need to meet work requirements with the correct verification. We can't just take a person's statement. We have to have the verification. So I'm going to do this quick example, then pause and take a look at the chat box. So in household example 1, we have head of household mom, legal or non-legal spouse, dad, his name is Jack. We have a child named Jolene and a child named John. Just a couple people put in the chat box, how many members are in this household? I'm going to jump to. Yes, I see some folks put in the number 4. 4 is correct. All of these members of the household are actual members of the household according to birth to 3 seats eligibility. So household example 2, we've got grandmother who's living in the home, Birdie, she's there, 19-year-old college son working from home, Billy, and we've got mom, there's no legal spouse, and we've got Beth. Beth the child, she's 2 months old. How many children, or excuse me, how many members are in this household? Seeing a lot of people enter. Yes, 2. There are only 2 people in this household, Barbara and Beth. Billy, not a part of the household. Even if Billy, let's say he's not a college student, he's just hanging out at home and doing not a lot. Billy's not part of the household. Even if he has a disability and mom and Barbara is taking care of him financially because he's experiencing a disability and having a hard time getting out on his own, over the age of 18, excuse me, not a member of the household. Okay, so I'm going to jump back to some of the questions that were asked before. Sarintha, yes, I will update the slide. I know exactly what you're talking about. What is the parent of the MUP lives with an aunt or grandparent? Only the first generation parent or the legal guardian of the minor unmarried parent can be the head of household. So I'll use me as an example. My mom's name is Colleen. If Colleen and I live together and I have a child, but I'm 14 years old, Colleen has to apply. I apply as a minor unmarried parent for my child. If I happen to live with my aunt, who's not my legal guardian, that's a tricky situation, and we need to track down the legal guardian of the minor unmarried parent for that baby to apply for birth to 3 seats. If there is a tricky custody situation with the minor unmarried parent, let me know and we can track down the legal guardian of that minor unmarried parent, but that legal guardian of the minor unmarried parent is the one who needs to apply. Okay, so next question. What if they have a college children over age of 18 that parents support? Nope, college children, not part of the household. Yep, if a parent kicks out a teenage child, they can kick them out, but they are still legally responsible for that kid. So that minor parent, they still need to apply on behalf of the teenage parent. Parent with disability does not have to work. Correct, Sarantha. That is something that is updated from previous years. So new information and a change. Thank you for clarifying. For college students, they are considered full-time if they take 12 hours or more with a requirement of 20 hours for a B-3 seat. Do they also have to have a job or some sort of training to make up the difference in time? No, I'm going to go over that specifically, Erin, in a later slide, that how to calculate the number of hours in college world to the number of clock hours. Okay, great. So we're going to move on. Another example, I'm going to go through this one quickly. So also just reiterating some of the things for a family, whether or not we need documents. So taking a look at this example, we've got Devin, the biological mom, Winston, who's the name of my dog, not human child. I work at the LWE and I'm part-time volleyball coach. I have a 3-year-old dog, human child, who's very adorable. And my disabled grandfather or disabled father of me, grandfather of Winston, lives with me and he has a knee replacements. He's very proud of his handicap parking tag. Do we need documents for all 3 of these? Just one? More than one? You can go ahead and enter it in the chat box. I'm going to just zip through. Yes, you need documents for me. Yes, you need documents for Winston. No, you do not need documents for Ron, the disabled grandfather. Very good. Just the mom and the kid. That's right, Pam. And Mary, I do see that the question in the chat box, a parent that is a minor is not the legal guardian of their child. They are the legal guardian when they turn 18. They cannot write or sign legal documents like what they would need in order to sign up for birth to 3 seats if they are under the age of 18. So I have that question why, but we're going to just go ahead and skip. In this different scenario, if the disabled person was my husband, would we need documentation for that person? Yes, you would need documentation for that person. Very good. Okay, moving right along. So we're going to jump back into those eligibility requirements, specifically family income. So I promised you there's a table here with the family size, the gross monthly income for that family in dollars over here. And again, I want to highlight that that's monthly income. In order to determine this, you find 2 sequential pay statements within 2 months or 60 days of the application. If pay statements aren't available, a professional written statement from the employer is sufficient. What should be included is shown later. Monthly unearned income should also be included in the total monthly income for families. So for example, if I'm working at the Department of Education, I also receive alimony from my divorce. I put those 2 together to get my gross monthly income. We'll go over examples of that in just a few minutes. And just a highlighted orange box here, you should not use direct match for B-3 eligibility determination. Just wanted to put it out there. Direct match is great for LA4, not going to help you here. That special circumstances, so families with a minor unmarried parent, as I mentioned earlier, will have a slightly raised income threshold for families with a minor unmarried parent to try to assist in making sure that that minor unmarried parent is getting some additional support. And those numbers are here. If a child has special needs, they may be required to complete various additional services outside of that center that they are housed with for birth to 3 seats. And if, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. If that child needs to go elsewhere, they should not be penalized for not being full-time. You should enroll them as a full-time student with B-3 seats and attempt to use the birth to 3 seat funding in order to either help make sure that the services that child needs are available at that center, or pay for additional things that can help the child who has special needs. I see some questions in the chat box. I'm going to address them in a few minutes, but I got to keep rolling in order for us to stay on time. So household composition, they can be comprised of more than one adult, and if so, both must submit eligibility documents. All adults in the household must meet those eligibility requirements, and households may have children who are not B-3 recipients because they can still be those dependent children between the ages of 0 to 17 and 11 months. And you should still collect birth certificates or IDs as applicable to verify the household size to show that those children do exist in that household. So now we're going to talk about earned and unearned income. I'm going to address the questions in the chat box in just a second. So Janae asked, LDUA has been pretty flexible with immunization records. If a family doesn't have current immunization records for the child but has all other required documentation, would they be considered ineligible? Technically, yes. If they are struggling to get that immunization verification, they can provide an appointment card to show that they're going to get their child immunized. They may also, I wouldn't recommend having every single parent do this, but there are, if a child or family doesn't want to get immunized, there are exceptions, and they can provide a statement saying, I do not want to get my child immunized, and that is sufficient as well. I wouldn't, go around saying, hey, get out of immunizations with this flag, because that's fraud. But if it's something that they really legitimately are choosing not to do because of whatever's going on in their life, because of whatever philosophical or religious beliefs they have, no, immunizations does not completely disqualify a family. Kim asked, why did the audit team ask for direct match if it's not relevant for B-3 seats? That statement is new to this year. We have made a lot of changes. So direct match was never never a thing that should have been exclusively used for verifying eligibility, but it is something that they may have asked for in the past because it was used sometimes to help get support for that 200% federal poverty level income verification. But since the income level has increased, it's above the threshold of what direct match finds. So it's no longer relevant. Francine asked, do they need to provide documents to prove they are a disability child and receiving services? Yes. Pam asked, do we know when we will get our monitoring reports back? Very soon. They should be by the end of April, I think, is the aim that Terry and her team has for those monitoring reports. I don't know the specific date, but soon. Okay, earned and unearned income. So earned income is anything can be verified by pay statements, a letter from the employer, or a declaration of income for irregular employment. And on the lead agency library, which is linked, and you have, you have all been given access to that in the previous email that I sent out after the previous webinar. And you can get all of the documentation that I have sent out previously on that page. But a pay statement is a traditional check stub that shows the hours worked, rate of pay, parent's name, and frequency of pay. A letter from employer should have the same information, handwritten or typed letter on company letterhead as able, with contact information for the employer, and the same information shows hours worked, rate of pay, parent's name, or the employee's name, frequency of pay. Then that declaration of income for irregular employment is a specific form. I'm going to show a screenshot of it in a couple of slides, but it will declare non-traditional employment and income, and it will have the last 12 months in a small table that will verify the amount of money they are earning on average per month, and you will help them fill that out. Very rarely should parents be providing federal tax documents from the previous calendar year to you, because they should be able to do one of these three things. If for some reason a parent or an employer is giving a difficult time in completing either of these three and they're trying really, really hard to give you tax documents, reach out to me. I really don't think that there should be any reason where these would not work. There are some times where we get surprises, so just continue to reach out to me. So unearned income. Unearned income is any kind of benefit or dollars that are paid to a person that's not an employee. So unemployment benefits, retirement, alimony, child support, veterans benefits, disability benefits, social security income. All of these things are included in their income. Sometimes parents may not know that they receive something and they might not consider it income. So they probably definitely don't call it unearned income. So if you say, okay, declare all your unearned income to me, they might say, what does that mean? And then you would give them this list. So try to specifically ask for each of these things individually, because they may not lump them together. It's not intuitive that that would be a part of monthly income. So this is an example of what child support documents from DCFS would look like. A screenshot, a picture of a computer screen, a printout, anything that you can get, we'll be flexible with you as long as it is clear the child's name, their case number, the date, the amount, etc. Veterans benefits. Unfortunately, you can't get in to get an example unless you have an account, but you can download that veterans benefits through the VA website. An example of Social Security income looks like this. It says there, the frequency is this monthly benefit. This is the amount that that person's getting. You would count that into their monthly income. And then it will have their name at the top. It will have the dates elsewhere on the page. If you have unearned income, you should ask every single family member explicitly and specifically which that they have. If they're not reporting that they receive something, that they actually receive it, even if it's a benevolent, non-intentional mistake, they could be putting themselves in a really difficult situation come tax season. So try to help families report as honestly as possible, but you also remember that it is self-reported. So you're not detectives, take them at their word, but also set them up for success in telling the truth and knowing all of the pieces that could be used for unearned income. Frequency of pay may vary. So please pay careful attention to dates on statements provided by the family. So just because it's Social Security income doesn't mean it's always going to be monthly. Some families may get it bi-weekly, some families may get it monthly, some may get it every 6 months. Who knows? I've seen crazier things. So just please pay very careful attention to dates, because that could be the difference between a family being eligible and not if you're using the wrong calculations that are, for a bi-weekly statement rather than a monthly statement. So the declaration of income for irregular employment should be used when parents receive money for seasonal or temporary work, are given money each month from family members to help with monthly living expenses, or are earning cash payments for work considered self-employment. Those would be the scenarios in which you would use this declaration of irregular income. I think I typed that wrong on the page, so I'll go back and correct that. I'm going to just put that link in the chat box so y'all can look at it at your leisure. I'm going to keep rolling. So special circumstances. as I've mentioned before, families experiencing homelessness are not categorically eligible. This is new information from previous years. The department recommends 90 days from the application date to collect income verification. Children living in foster care are categorically eligible and only need their partner or their placement agreement from DCFS. All right, child and family documentation, what to collect and keep to verify eligibility. All families, besides families of children in foster care, need to provide immunization records or immunization exemption, identification and proof of residency, such as a driver's license, social security card, and for the head of household applying on behalf of the child and the non-legal or legal spouse. Birth certificates or hospital records for the children, and custodial documentation if the biological parent is not the person applying for the child. So that's custody judgments, child placement agreements from DCFS, provisional custody, power of attorney, a whole bunch of things. I would highly recommend if you start to get families who are people applying for their non-biological child, get tight with your local family court, because they will be really good at helping you track down the needed documentation that you should. Remember, we're not attorneys, so we can't give legal advice, and I certainly wouldn't want to, but you can direct them in the right place. The residency requirement is Louisiana, not the parish. Mary asked the question in the chat box. A person does not have to reside in your parish to get care in your parish. For example, if a person lives in Jefferson Parish but works in Orleans and wants to place their child in a childcare center next to where they work in Orleans, they can apply in Orleans Parish. Vice versa, just proof of living in Louisiana. You can ask for that, Emmy, that they be residents of your parish. But I would, if you run into families where you are turning away families who are not residents of Lafayette frequently, one, I would say connect them to the parish in which they reside if they are also a Ready Start network, and contact me so we can try to help that family. Because if they're meeting the eligibility requirements, we do want them to get into care. So this is the age frame for our infants 1s, 2s, and 3s. The latest birth date that is eligible is October 1st, 2018. Anyone born before that? Too old. Anybody born 10-1 or after? In. So just commit these dates to memory as best as you can. Pam, unfortunately, my understanding is yes, they need to be Louisiana residents. I can follow up and see if there's any pushback there about folks in Texas, because I do know that, you know, especially in Caddo and probably Calcasieu too, I'm sure that you have some in other, you know, the surrounding states. Unfortunately, it's unlikely that we'll be able to be lenient on that. But I will write that down. Okay, moving right along. So immunizations, age, and custody, we've kind of touched on some of these things already, but again, you need to verify the child's age through that birth certificate, through that hospital record, and court issued or signed documentation for custody. They must be up to date on their immunizations or have that exemption. They can get an accelerated schedule. You can get an appointment card if they are going to get a shot. It's not up to date. You know it's not up to date. They know it's not up to date, but you know, you're working to get it done. There again, and if you're at any point confused or not sure, reach out to me. So that's what everybody needs. Now we're going to talk about the distinction between work, school, or training, or actively seeking employment. You absolutely will get a copy of this PowerPoint, Benita, don't you worry. So the head of household, legal or non-legal spouse, and minor unmarried parent aged 16 to 18, really 16 to 17 and 11 months. Once they turn 18, they are able to do their own application. needs to be meeting one of these 3 categories. They can be a combination of the 3 as well, but it has to be at least one. So to confirm work eligibility, those 2 sequential pay statements within 2 months or 60 days from the application date. That shows that rate of pay, hours worked, dates of the pay period, etc. If they're newly employed, a professional letter, or if they don't get traditional pay statements, maybe they're paid in cash or regular checks, can get a professional letter from their employer, or if they're self-employed, that declaration of irregular income. And remember, adults with disabilities, if their disability is verified, do not need to be an employee, employed or in training. Here's an example of a pay statement. I've highlighted the key components of it for you. The hourly, the type of pay, it's hourly pay. The rate of pay, she gets paid $7.50 an hour. She worked 76.15 hours. Her total pay for this pay period was $571. We see that her pay period was from February 22nd, 2021 to March 7th, 2021. So it was I believe bi-week, or this is a 2-week period. So we got all the information. I blacked out the actual information for her, but it gave her information, her name, etc. Professional letter could look something like this. It gives, that same detail, the $10 an hour, the location, the start date, the name of the employer. Another thing with letters is that because they are a little less, official looking, we want you to go that extra step and verify that you contact that employer and say, hey, Devin, I just want to confirm that Winston really does work for you. How's things going? She's applying for childcare assistance or for a pilot program. Then that's, you would do that. And then note in your application documents that this person has, that you have confirmed for that person's employment. It can be in any language, as long as you're able to confirm. I would get Google Translate up, or try to call and contact and see, or hire somebody temporarily to do some translating for you. But again, you should still contact that employer. It can be a handwritten note. It doesn't have to be on company letterhead, because we know many families don't work for an official company. They might be employed by, an individual, and that is okay, as long as they're meeting that 20-hour a week regulation. As long as you can count all of their other, eligibility requirements, they should be good to go. So upcoming employment, again, somebody might be coming off of maternity leave, especially our parents of infants who are about to give birth and are going to enroll shortly, or coming off of short-term disability. Same situation, that signed letter, number of hours worked and rate of pay, the start date, and it needs to be within 60 days of that application date. Special circumstances, 15 hours per week. If the caregiver has a child with special needs, you need to verify that through the child's diagnosis, if they have an IEP or an ISFP, letter from a doctor. And then unless disabled, verified through Social Security Administration, supplemental security, the things that I've listed already, unless they are disabled, they have to meet those work, training, or actively seeking employment. I talked about the declaration of irregular income form, and this is what it looks like. I've highlighted on the form directly that average hours worked per week. It is super important that you put that in so that we can really easily look when monitoring. Yes, this person is working an average of 20 hours or more per week. If this number is less than 20, not going to work out for that family. They are not qualifying. You would put the month, their average weekly hours worked, their gross income, and complete the rest of the form. It's pretty intuitive, but I just wanted to highlight that average hours worked per week, because the eligibility requirement is based on that weekly number of hours. So just some quick common errors to go over. The pay statements must be within 2 months or 60 days of the application date. Unless a family is experiencing homelessness, you can extend that to 90 days of the application. confirm that 20 hours worked per week, not per pay statement per week, not per pay statement per week, not per pay statement. Just wanted to reiterate that. 15 hours if a parent has a child with disabilities. Tax documents, please try not to use them as much as possible. If a parent is trying to give that to you, reach out to me. Statement of irregular income should only be used if there's truly no other documentation to show work, if there's no letters, if there's no pay statements, if there's no anything. And it must include that hours worked per week that I highlighted in the previous slide. And provide pay statements for all work. So if a parent is working multiple jobs, you need to have the pay statements for both jobs or all 3 jobs or all however many jobs that person is working, or a letter from their employer for every source of employment. I'm going to quickly pause because I know that there are some questions that popped up in the chat. We are moving right along, so I feel like I'm okay on time. Some payments, Pam in Cato said some pay statements don't include rate of pay as adult is salary, but gives hours and gross total. That is okay. You should just use a given formula that we have to show how much that person is earning per pay statement per week, and we will be able to break it down from there. So Kim in Vermillion said she's still a little unclear. It seems like a no, but then there was a SNAP claim shown. We had used it not to qualify families entirely, but to verify the income component. Yeah, since we have increased the threshold for family income, SNAP is not going to be a clear indicator of eligibility. And because SNAP doesn't come in a like cash money, like it can be used as cash, but it's not, it can only be used for certain things. So it does not count as income because it can't be literally used for everything. There are restrictions on it, so we don't count it as unearned income. Can it be 15 hours work per week if the disabled child is a sibling of the applying child? Ooh, that's a good question. Yes, if they have a child with a disability, that means that they can work the 15-hour threshold. Just provide documentation of that child's disability, that they are a part of the household, and yes, verify that through that way, and yes, the 15 hours minimum. Okay, now we're going to get into school or training. And somebody asked a question earlier that got us talking about the clock hours versus credit hours question. So we're going to get to that in just a second. So parents may be working 20 hours a week or more, or be a full-time student or in a full-time training or career. So again, the way to verify that is a training or school transcript, again, within 2 months or 60 days of the application. A school schedule that says Devin Camerata, work full-time, part-time, or 12 credit hours, or 17 credit hours, or however many it is, or a letter from a school advisor signed on the institution's letterhead verifying student status. So sometimes there are training programs like for a beauty school or a cosmetology situation that may not be, or it may not come in credit form, but they could say that they're a full-time person. They might be an apprentice to a person doing a trade that qualifies as long as they're able to show this kind of documentation. So calculating credit hours, we're going to get into the 4th grade math here in a second. So, just go on the journey with me. So 12 credit hours is the equivalent of a minimum full-time school or training program. So anything at 12 or above, consider it full-time. So if they're 12 or above, as long as they have everything else in order, they qualify. So if 12 credit hours is the equivalent of 20 clock hours, because 20 clock hours is that or above, they qualify. On the hour thing, not just holistically. That ratio is 1.6 to 1. So there's 1.6 credit hours is equal to 1 clock hour. So if a person is in school for 3 credit hours, she's utilizing 4.8 clock hours. 3 credit hours times 1.6 clock hours is 4.8 clock hours. So she would need to work at least an additional 15.2 clock hours per week to meet eligibility requirements. The math is just decimals and multiplying. Hopefully you get not so many people in the part-time half and half situation because it's tricky, but I believe in you. If I could get to this math, you can get to this math, that's for sure. So here's a couple of examples of transcripts, seeing that credit hours. This little snapshot doesn't have the name on it for privacy reasons, but you would want to have the privacy or the the person's name. And again, 12 is the minimum of full-time. Anything less than 12 is part-time. So again, name, enrollment status, the institution. So actively seeking work. I'm going to go through actively seeking work, then check the chat box again. Actively seeking employment can be a thing. There are some nuances to this year. Again, for my returning folks, don't panic. Some new stuff coming. The actively seeking work is verified through either a hire account registration through louisianaworkforce.net. I'll show you that website in just a second. Or unemployment statements with the client's name, date of payments for all adults in the household who are not employed or in training. That is another document that needs to be dated within the 60 days of the application. You should count it in their unearned income. And unemployment statements count for this because in order to apply for unemployment in Louisiana as of within the last 3 years, they also have to submit a hire account to the unemployment powers that be in order to gain unemployment. So if they have unemployment, they've also already created a hire account. But they may not have applied for unemployment, which is why they may submit just the hire account. This is the new part. If a family previously deemed eligible in the year 2021 or 2022 was through ASC or actively seeking employment, this upcoming year or their next round of determination, they must be eligible by being employed or in school or in training. So another example, if I applied for Winston in 2020, 2021 as actively seeking employment, I'm still actively seeking employment for a whole other year. And I'm trying to apply again for his third year. He's a 3-year-old now. And I'm trying to say, oh, I'm still actively seeking employment. You say, nah, Devin, you've had 2 years. You need employment or training. So if there's any families who you've previously deemed eligible as actively seeking employment, and they are coming up on any redetermination time, I highly recommend getting them some information about getting into employment if they have not yet already. Notify families that were previously deemed actively seeking employment eligible that their time is coming. They will need to change their status by the time their redetermination comes up. If they're just applying for the first time this year, they have that 12 months. Next year, they will need to be employed or in training. So here's a couple of snapshots of what those eligibility documents look like. Here is an example of what the hire account looks like. And a quick note, you can get recent dates for the hire account. However, some people may have set up an account a long time ago and have been unemployed and then employed again and unemployed and employed again. And their account may not have a recent date within 60 days of the application. That's okay, because we wouldn't want them to delete their account, make a new account. I don't even know if they can do that. But we just need proof that they have an account in order to be deemed eligible for actively seeking employment with the hire account. The unemployment, yes, they should have dates because that is really easy and clear. And it's also for unearned income, it's like doubly needed for the dates. The hire account is okay if it doesn't have a date. I would submit the date that they printed it out and gave it to you. That's helpful, but it does need to have their name on it. And a person cannot apply as actively seeking employment and also already be employed. That should be intuitive, but you never know. Okay, I see a question that I do want to address. Actually, it's a good question in the chat box there. So there's two. And both from Pam's. Great. So Pam Crook, actually 3 Pam questions. Pam Crook in Caddo asked, what is accepted part-time or full-time? Do they have to be full-time? They can be part-time, but if they're part-time, they also have to be working. Or they can be part-time and actively seeking employment, but ideally they'd be employed. Pam Miller from Jefferson Davis said, SNAP is not to be used as earned or unearned income, so what would we need it for? You don't need it. Yeah, you don't need to collect anything about SNAP. Then Pam in Caddo again asked another question. What if a family is employed this year and then at redetermination unemployed and a higher account is created? Is this okay? Yes, they just can't be considered actively seeking employment for 2 subsequent years starting this year. If we get into a 4th and 5th year, or if and when we get into the 4th and 5th year and it's back and forth, we'll come up with something about that. But if they were previously employed, something bad happened and they're not employed any longer, but they were not previously deemed eligible as actively seeking employment, they can be actively seeking employment now. They just can't do it 2 years in a row starting now. Okay. So just some reminders, they must submit that proof of employment. The only exception is children in foster care or the individual with the verified disability. Families in redetermination must also submit all eligibility documents, even if they did not submit something previously in error, even if something is newly requested this year, it wasn't true for them the original time they applied. You need to update all of their documents with current eligibility requirements. And all documentation should be signed, dated, and match the other documents submitted for that family. So again, double checking that they gave you the number of birth certificates for the number of children that are actually in their household. You have employment or training verification for the number of adults in the household, et cetera. So now we're going to get into more math. Before I do, I just want to quickly pause and see if there's anybody who has any questions about what has already been said. When will the eligibility worksheet be updated to exclude SNAP? I'm going to pause on that question because SNAP, from my understanding, is not, you can look at it, but it is not calculatable in the next section. Calculatable is not a word, but it might, this next section might help. It's on the eligibility worksheet for the one that encompasses all, like including LA4, and it might be on the other one just as like an additional thing if they want to report it. But when we get into the calculations, that it might help clarify. So calculating total monthly income. Speaking of the family eligibility worksheet, this should look familiar to you. It's on that worksheet at the back side on the bottom. You are going to use these formulas for any type of income, earned or unearned, in order to find that total monthly income. If it's hourly, you find that hourly wage times the hours per week that they worked, and times 4.33, which is the number of weeks in a month per year. That's the average. And if they just get paid once a month, you use that gross salary that one time per month. A little caveat here, 1 month, ideally you'll be able to get 2 pay statements within the 60 days. Sometimes the way that the pay statements fall, you can only get 1, try to get 2. The 2 most recent, even if one is outside of the 60 days, just make a note. I know this is outside of the 60 days. I just wanted to make sure I had 2. It's better to have 2 statements, 1 being outside of the date than only 1 statement. Then if they're paid the same gross amount 2 times per month, like the 1st and the 15th, aka bi-weekly, you take that amount times 2. They're paid the same gross amount every 2 weeks. That gross salary divided by 2 times 4.33, they get paid weekly. That gross salary times 4.33. I will say, if at any point you want to go over your math with me, please let me know. I both love and hate math, so we can work through it together. Many people in the past have gone through their calculations with me or with somebody on your team. Definitely, please feel comfortable doing that. And again, I want to reiterate, is for both the earned and unearned income, you take those individual pieces, you add them together to get the total. So again, for reference, the income eligibility, that unearned and earned income total cannot exceed this amount on the right. depending on the number of members of their family. Even if it's $1 over, there's really no flexibility there. You can double check your math and hopefully maybe something didn't, you carried a 1 or you rounded when you shouldn't have. But the income is the hard line in the sand. So here's an example of calculating pay with a couple of different things. I have 3 different pay statements. I found the average monthly pay based on these 2-week periods. I think I calculated it by 2-week periods. With the dollar amounts, I added them up. I found the average. I divided it by 3, the number of pay statements to get that amount. Then I used my formula multiplier. I found that amount, divided it by 2, multiplied it by 4.33 to get my average monthly earned income. Then I did the same thing over here. Well, close to the same thing. I did math over here for the child support and alimony in this example. I added alimony, since it's monthly, you leave it alone, weekly times 4.33 to get that 866 number. I add my totals, 866 plus 500 plus 734.30 to get my $2,100 number. Really quick, if I reference this page, if I'm a family of 2, do I qualify? And go ahead and enter into the chat box while I look at this most recent note. So Carmen asked a great question in the chat box that I'm going to address. Yes, that person does qualify. Because if I'm a family of 2, 2,100, it's less than 3,939. So that person qualifies. Very good. There's a question in the chat box about, okay, Benita, I'm gonna get to that question in just a second because I'm not sure if that's a one-on-one error or a whole group error, because that's the first time I'm hearing of it, but I'll double check and resend out at the end of this. Carmen put a scenario in the chat box that I'm gonna read out. So if mom qualified using the hire account last year, she was temporarily employed at Walmart, but no longer works there, is seeking employment again. We can qualify the child using the hire account again with the original date she registered for the hire account. Unfortunately, the answer is no. If she is applying as actively seeking employment again, she cannot qualify in that way. I would be curious to know that scenario, a little bit more about that scenario. And the situation where like why she left her employment or what happened there, and maybe support her in getting employment. But unfortunately, if she wasn't employed last year at the time of her application, she has to be employed at the time of her application this year. So, reach out to me individually if you want additional support for that family. Question 21, 22, B-3, it now changed back to divide by 2. Yep, we clarified to make sure it was in alignment. So the current 2022, 2023 calculations are the calculations you should use. Cerintha, yes, unfortunately, if she's worked in between, she still doesn't qualify. And I'll give a little bit more reasoning for that. For folks who are actively seeking employment in CCAP, one, if you apply as actively seeking employment and in CCAP, you only have 90 days of certification. And if you don't get employment in that 90 days to verify your employment, you lose care and cannot apply for care again for 2 years. So this is still less restrictive than the CCAP requirement. In the case of this person, even if she worked 11 months in between, if she worked 11 months in between, then she could potentially, depending on the dates, submit the application with the employment of like the most recent pay statements and try to get employment as quickly as she can to verify, to get back on the path. But the intention behind it, like I said, going back to the why of the eligibility requirements, we want to be able to support families in getting that stability and getting employment that they can maintain. Obviously, things happen and people lose their jobs, or people are in toxic work environments that they need to leave. And we don't want to force people to stay in employment. However, we need to draw a line where we're not just saying, oh, you can be seeking employment for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, with kind of no consequence or no accountability measures. If there are scenarios like this one, Carmen, that you're, that are really like, oh, this feels wrong, connect with me about that, one off, and we can see what we can do, or it might not be all doom and gloom, and really we can say like, oh my gosh, yeah, she actually was still employed at the time that she would have been reapplying. She can reapply based on the previous employer and then move on. But that one-off scenario is not enough to change the policy on the restriction for actively seeking employment. So I'm going to move on unless anybody has any other questions. Please put them in the chat box. Calculating family income. Reminder to be meticulous. And this, I taught 4th grade math for a little bit, so I keep saying 4th grade math not as like a insult to all of us, but as literally finding averages is 4th grade math curriculum. So if anybody needs to go back on that journey with me, I am happy to do so with you. I will make sure that, we verify and we double check. Pam, I see your comment in the chat box. Yes, I will release an edited version of the eligibility worksheet for B-3 to make sure that that is removed. Your eligibility documentation should also include your math to verify the eligibility for the family. So show your work to show your monitoring team from the department how you got to that conclusion. Kim, thank you for bringing that question up in the chat box. Kim asked a question about overtime or tips being addressed. So I don't actually have a slide about that, so I'll bring that up in the next webinar and put some clear slides about overtime / tips. But essentially what we want to do with our pay statements is establish a pattern. What is their average pay? If it happens on 2 pay statements, if it happens on both of their pay statements, so they get overtime 2 times, that is their gross pay. That is their average pay. That happened 2 times. They establish a pattern. It's something that they may get on multiple pay statements. Then count it. If it only happens on 1, and it's the difference between they're eligible or ineligible, don't count it. Again, I'm going to make a really clear slide about that in the next one. I apologize for not including that in this one. And thank you, Kim, for bringing it up. I really appreciate that, because a lot of our families do work in situations where they may get tips, they may get commission, they may get all kinds of different addendums to their pay statements. But again, we want to keep in mind looking at a representation of their pay, looking at what is a true representation of their pay, and if it is creating a pattern, or if it's establishing a pattern that this is what that person is really earning. Okay. So redetermination, we've definitely touched on this quite a few times, so I'm not going to linger too long. But families entering a 2nd or 3rd year of eligibility, you should start notifying them, 45 days to 30 days prior to their end date. Collect the same documentation that they would if they're new, as if they're new applicants, and if they were actively seeking employment previously, they need to apply it as either in training or employment. So there's a quick summary, and it's certainly not encompassing everything, but it is encompassing a lot. It is your job to determine eligibility and maintain the documents, track attendance, follow up with families at the end of, or like before their 12 months of care is up, and follow up with them throughout the application process if they're not able to provide all eligibility documents at the initial meeting or initial application, like Emmy said, and know that you guys have, like, part of the reason for this pilot, and I think I mentioned this at the beginning, or excuse me, at the previous webinar, but if you, remember the intent of this pilot is to help families get into care that they definitely need, and to position you as Ready Start Networks as leaders in the community who can make really great decisions for the children and families in your community. And if there's a scenario, or if you're seeing a trend where something just either one doesn't feel right, or you're like, oh man, this would be so much easier if we did X, loop me in and communicate with me, because we are learning and growing together. And there may be something that I, in Baton Rouge, I'm not able to see, because I'm not, in it right there with you with families. Your experience may be able to help us collectively improve the situation as a whole. It may be that we can't make a change, and that's, it is what it is, but at least it's, out there in the universe that we can continue thinking about. And then please, I can't reiterate enough, please ask questions if you come up with something that is not making sense. Please reach out. The folks who have reached out, I keep going back to Children's Coalition. Teresa Lawson, who I don't know if is on the call right now, she's been with us for Birth to 3 for the last two years, and is still with Children's Coalition, but is passing the torch to another colleague. But Teresa asked me questions almost every day, and both years Children's Coalition has come out of their monitoring with no findings, because Teresa was adamant about making sure she did not proceed unless she had answers to her questions, and was really meticulous about following up with me with every situation. Please do not feel like you are being a bother. It is one of my jobs, but it is my job to help you here. So, we are partners in this. And I don't want you to feel like you were caught off guard by something. I know we don't know what we don't know, but ask just in case. So I have some practice scenarios that we can go through. I do want to pause because we've been on for an hour and a half. I do want to just open up a conversation for any questions or any thoughts or anything that I haven't yet addressed that you were hoping to hear about in the webinar at this point. Because I don't have any brand new information to give you for the rest of the way. And I'll just use the rest of the time to go through practice scenarios unless folks have burning questions to ask. I kind of can't believe I'm not hearing anything, but I'm not hearing anything. So I'm going to just go through the practice scenarios. You can enter your answers in the chat box. And here we go. So family eligibility example number 1, mom and dad are working 20 hours a week. Mom earns $10 an hour and dad earns 12 per hour, and both get paid weekly. They have 3 children born on March 21st, 2022, April 30th, 2018, and August 13th, 2016. They earn no additional income. First, how many family members are in this household? Go ahead and enter your answers in the chat box. I'll give 15 seconds. Lots of number 5s. Let's see if y'all are right. Yes, there are 5 members of the household, mom, dad, and the 3 children. Very good. Same scenario. New question. Are the children in this household aged birth to 3 and eligible for birth to 3 seats? Another 15 seconds. I'm seeing a lot of answers, and the children born on March 21st and April 30th are, but the child born in 2017 is turning 5, and unfortunately he needs to go to kindergarten. And but he's still part of the household and should still be counted in that income. So same scenario. is the family meeting the income eligibility for birth to 3 seats? I'm going to give you 30 seconds for this one. I don't think I gave you the right amount of information now that I'm looking at this. Oh, no, I did. They're working 20 hours a week. Don't get, if I was still a 4th grade math teacher, I would have given away how to solve this equation. I thought I didn't give you the hours, but I did. So hint, hint, use the hours and the dollar amount. We've got a few people saying yes, that they're eligible. Divided by 2. Sheila, good catch. Let me see if I can, if that was a teacher mistake, I probably didn't copy and paste correctly. But yes, the total income for this family is less than the $6,720 max for a 5-person family, so they are eligible. Okay, next scenario. Mother is working part-time and provided 1 pay statement. She's also in community college and provided the note below to verify her employment. Has she provided enough information to verify eligibility? And bonus, can you correct it if you say no? Kim said, nope. Bonus question, type what she should correct or what she would need. Yes, Pam said she needs a transcript. Very good. Or an official letter, or some pay statements, or proof of anything. She gave a lot of verbal statements, not a lot of proof. Okay, here's a new example. Mom and dad are both unemployed. They each have signed up for a hire account through Louisiana Workforce Commission and have provided unemployment benefit statements with dates of statements and have brought appointment cards for their 5 children's next immunization visit. Has the family provided enough documentation to verify eligibility? Got some no's. We got a missing birth certificate. We've got, yep, 2 people saying birth certificates. For income verification, yes, they have. But for family documentation, they still need the birth certificates or hospital records. And the age, very good, Janae, of the children. Yeah, because they could be 5 children who are, you know, quintuplets that are 11. They're not eligible. Very good. Okay. Fast forward 12 months, what must mom and dad demonstrate for their 2nd year of eligibility? Work or school? Work, yeah, work, very good. They must either be employed or in training or school to be able to verify their children. Very good. Scenario number 4, Mother Barbara lives with her mother and father. The child's grandparents are Bertie and Billy. Adult son Bob, and 3 infants, Joe, Jack, and John. Father of adult son Robert has passed away, and father of 3 infants, father of 3 infants, Sam, lives in town and has visitation rights. So this gets into something kind of on the side of what we talked about, and not a specific example of what we talked about earlier, but what is the size of this household, for income threshold? We've got a couple of 4s in the chat box. Manny's in there, Tara's in there. Let's see. There are 4 members of this household. Yeah, give yourself a pat on the back. Nice job. If we were in my 4th grade math classroom, you guys would be getting Tootsie Rolls and other goldfish snacks on your desk. Very good. Okay, family eligibility example number 5. The mother and child live with the mother's parents. The mother is not working and provided a statement of no income form. Mother did not provide evidence of seeking work or attending school. The grandmother supports the family and her income is within the eligibility limit. The grandfather provided a statement of no income, but no evidence of seeking work or attending school. Is this family eligible for birth to 3 seats? I'm seeing a lot of no's. Bonus question, what would you ask for or what would you need clarification on from this family? She needs to be seeking work. Okay. She's not yet eligible because she needs to provide work or actively seeking employment documentation, like you said. Grandmother's income doesn't count at this time because she's not legally responsible for the child, unfortunately. I have seen a lot of scenarios like this where grandma wants to apply because she loves the baby so much, great baby spends so much time at her house, but she is not the legal guardian, so she cannot provide. Great question. Aaron asked, is the mom a minor unmarried parent? We don't know from this scenario presented, but that's a great question to ask and be thinking about, because then if mom was a minor unmarried parent, if she provided her school or income eligibility, then grandma's income could be considered. Very good. And Janae, you also get credit for that too, because you said if mom is under 18. Very nice. So a single mother of one child makes $4,000 per month as a nurse. She works 40 hours per week and has provided her child's birth certificate, immunization records, and all other employment verification. Is this family eligible for birth to 3 seats? 15 seconds. We've got a couple of no's already in the chat box. Correct. No, she is unfortunately just barely above, but even that $61 above does make her ineligible for this pilot. What I would do in this scenario, if there is any family who is close to the threshold, keep their contact information, have them keep your contact information. So if anything about their employment changes, if they, get into a situation that is different from where they are when they apply, that they can always come back. And please, make sure that they feel welcome to come back. But we do need to draw a hard line in the sand. Mother is applying for birth to 3 seats on June 1st. She receives statements bi-weekly and provides you with 3 pay statements dated March 12th, 26th, and April 30th. Does this parent have the appropriate documentation to prove eligibility? All right, seeing a lot of no's. No, the only eligible pay statement is one dated April 30th because the other 2 are out of the 2-month acceptable window. So again, in this scenario, I would say you've started an application, that's great. Today is June 1st. As soon as you get your next pay statement, give it to me. Your child can be enrolled depending on the other circumstances of the eligibility documentation she's provided. As soon as you give me that other pay statement, we can make it official. If you don't provide me that other pay statement by X date, you're out of the program, hopefully in a more polite way than that. Does a hire account require a social security number? If so, how does a new immigrant family set up a hire account? I don't believe it requires a social security number, Sarinda. I'll double check on that. That's a great question. I truly don't know. I will definitely double check and try to get back to you as soon as I can. Okie dokie. So bonus question, what will the date of the next eligible statement be if she receives bi-weekly pay statements? May 14th-ish, says Kim. Is she right? Is she wrong? Classmates, help her out. Yep, mid-May, she's right. Another tip for the folks in your team who are doing eligibility determination, get a calendar that you can mark up with a dry erase marker that's close at hand. I'm sure all of us as teachers already have calendars close by, but just to make sure, you may even want to print out a calendar for every person and mark off the dates that you received documents, that they are supposed to turn in documents, etc. like calendars are going to be your best friend. Very good. April 16th or May 14th. She could have gone within 60 days prior to April 30th. But if she, for whatever reason, didn't have that one, maybe she lost it. Maybe she was out sick that pay statement and didn't get one. Maybe she didn't want to share it with you for whatever reason. You could go backwards in time. You can go forwards in time as long as it is within 60 days. All righty. Another example, mother and father live together in the household with their quintuplets. Mother provides you with 2 pay statements within 2 months or 60 days of her application date. Father is working as well. They have a copy of the 5 children's birth certificates. What else would you need from this family? So you can put maybe 1 to 2 things in the chat box. There's quite a few possible answers here. Let's see what we can get together. Kim said father's work information. Check stubs, yep. Father's pay statements, immunization records, yep. Yep, very good. Let's see what else. So we need father's employment, immunization records for the children, licenses and IDs for parents. You would need to verify the income amount, and it's not 200% federal poverty level anymore. It's 85% median income, that number of hours worked per week, and the ages of the children. Okay. Alrighty, so that is the end of my practice scenarios. I hope that they were helpful. I know that they are definitely like level 1 versions of the level 15, 16, 17 that it'll feel like when you're working directly with families and you've got 100 different papers in front of you, and but hopefully they will be a good reference point for you when you're moving forward with your applications. So next steps. Complete and submit your planning document by May 6th to me via email, and that you're choosing the centers, you're getting to know your business office, preparing eligibility document procedures, planning your budget, review the lead agency library on Louisiana Believes. A couple of things will be updated there in the next few days, such as the family eligibility worksheet. For birth to 3, I will upload a updated version that includes, or that excludes, excuse me, SNAP, and make sure that it does not have homelessness as a categorically eligible requirement. I think somebody said that it was cut off for some reason, so it needs to be re-uploaded anyway. This slide deck will be uploaded there as well as the recording of this webinar. Then I also have started, and I'm going to just quickly show you, hopefully y'all will have to let me know if you can see my screen when I get to it. I'm going to stop share, and then I'm going to share again. So it's not quite finished yet. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to finish it in time for today to show you fully, but it was requested that I develop a calculator similar to what y'all have used in the past. It is optional, but you can turn it in with your planning document if you would like. And I do just want to share how this will work. So if I am, I'm going to use Vermilion, since y'all were the ones who asked for it. I'm going to use Vermilion. It's going to populate the number of seats that were in your original allocation. As you add them across the board, it's going to subtract from your total. It's also going to calculate just based on what the department allocated to you, not by the exact rate that you're going to pay. What you can do, and I can show you specifically as you request to show what you would like to alter the rate to if you would like in your reference tab, but you'll be able to use this here, put the site name, the number of seats at that age level, and the approximate amount that would cost, so that you can show that you're using all of your dollars. Again, this is an optional tool that is not quite finished, but I will share it out with you all in the next couple of days before the end of the week, and that will be there. So I'm going to then go back to my slides really fast. And hopefully y'all can see my screen. Kim, thank you for your enthusiasm for the calculator tool. So then also prepare any onboarding for administrative staff and collect documents for first reimbursement requests by July 1st. Remember that June 1st is when assurances and contact information will go live in EGMS. You'll be able to start your budgets on June 1st after you've completed your contact info and assurances, so that you can have that approved by or before July 1st. Please submit your budgets by or before July 15th. And remember that we're going to have a webinar on EGMS specific, on budget specific stuff at the end of May. And I'll have also gotten your planning documents by then. I'll be able to review and give you feedback before then, so that you're going into planning your budgets with all of the feedback, all of the information at hand. So it should be a really, really, really quick enter, plug, play, zip process for the budgets, as much as anything in a department or government agency can be. So then, of course, get enrolling children. You are more than welcome to get started on that as soon as possible with the information you have at hand. If you have any questions, contact me. Remember, there are no secrets in eligibility determination. We are all in this together. I am a resource for you. Think of me as an extension of your team, and save my email address, save my phone number, text me, call me, email me within reasonable work hours, please. We'll go from there. So this is my last slide. We're ending a few minutes early, which is wonderful. So if anybody has any questions, now is a great time to ask, but you are free to go. And remember, our next meeting will be at the end of May 25th, I believe is the date. And I will send out some additional reminders leading up to that, as well as the slides, as well as the updated library. Yeah, so anyway, have a wonderful afternoon. I really appreciate everybody's engagement today, and happy Wednesday.